This weekend, Formula One returns to Germany's Nürburgring circuit for the first time since 2013. And after this race win last weekend, Valtteri Bottas will be hoping to keep his championship dreams alive and catch his teammate Lewis Hamilton. Welcome back to the Grid Talk podcast. Today we'll be previewing the Eifel Grand Prix. Hosting today will be me, Ruby Price, and joining me will be engineering student Owain Medford.
Hello.
F1 expert Alex Booth.
Hello.
And Master of Engineering Jack Watson.
Hello.
So we're going to start with the big bombshell news of this week. Honda will be leaving F1 from the start of 2022, I believe. Like, they're still going to be around for next season, so Red Bull don't have to worry about that. But it was still a completely unexpected announcement, wasn't it, Jack?
Yeah, it did come out of the blue somewhat. Looking at the report and the press release, you can kind of understand why more wanting to focus on green initiatives using the vast amounts of money they pump into F1. You can understand why that would be used for elsewhere. So it's not a surprise to see a manufacturer leave F1, I suppose, thinking about it, especially given the current climate. But it is still a shame. I suppose it does speak volumes for Red Bull that everyone is reeling like they are, especially given how they started in F1. So it's a kind of a credit to Honda, really. But yeah, it's sad to see him go, and it's going to be interesting to see how we resolve this.
Yeah. And Alex, what does this potentially mean for Red Bull? Like, obviously, they're going to need a new engine come 2022. You know, Mercedes are going to say that they're too full up. Ferrari, I'm not sure anyone wants that Ferrari engine. And they've obviously had a tumultuous relationship with Renault. What's their options here?
Well, also Red Bull, but AlphaTauri as well. So potentially four cars at risk of no engines. But in order to avoid a repeat of what happened in 2015 when they decided to divorce the partnership with Renault, and it looked for a while that they were going to be engineless again. I think the rule is now there's an agreement that the team that supplies the fewest engines at the moment, which is Renault, are obliged to provide an engine for Red Bull and AlphaTauri as well. It'll be interesting, the conversations with Cyril Abiteboul and Christian Horner, given the history between those two. But it looks like there is a way out. It's most likely to be Renault. It's a shame that Honda has made the announcement, which it's done. As Jack mentioned, there's a lot of reasons as to why, and it is understandable when you see it. It's a shame that we're down to just manufacturers again, and it'd be nice to see more, but it's very hard to do when if you're a company that's pouring a tremendous amount of money into something that you're not really getting much reward from, like Honda are. They've won races, but they're not really mounting a challenge for the championship, which is the ultimate goal. But yeah, as you said, it's unlikely that Mercedes would supply an engine. It's most likely going to be Renault.
And Owain, Jack touched on this a little bit, like where the performance of that Honda engine is now. Obviously, Max Verstappen will have been told promises when he signed that contract extension at Red Bull, but they're going to be in a position to actually compete for a championship. But going back to any of the previous engines that the Red Bull has had, I don't think that's going to be likely. So what do you think this means for Max Verstappen's future as a, potential not Red Bull driver anymore?
Honestly, yeah, it's gonna be difficult for Red Bull to hold up their end of the bargain, sort of thing on that. If he's been given performance, what's the word?
Clauses?
Assurances, I'd say, and obviously Red Bull can't provide an engine to go in the car that will, be able to get them to them. They've only had 5 wins in 6 years with Hunt when he's been there, so it's not good. It doesn't look great, and I don't think it's going to get any better if they were to go to Renault or let alone Ferrari.
There is certainly that, and I think I saw news today that Hamilton would absolutely 100% veto Verstappen joining Mercedes whilst he's still there. So that's certainly not a door for him to go through, even if Mercedes were to just, remove Bottas's contract to try and get Verstappen across. We have seen a lot of contracts be, I don't want to say ignored, but at least ripped up this season. Rip Checo, basically. But yeah, it's just, I don't think anyone was expecting it other than Red Bull and Honda for them to drop out. But I assume that there will have been talks amongst the Red Bull crew and the AlphaTauri crew, obviously, as well, about, what was going to happen before the rest of us knew. But it will certainly look interesting to see 2021, what with the fact that they said, they're going to bring a championship winning engine next season, despite the limited development. like available to them. So it'll be interesting to see 2021. But the other news that sort of like popped up this week, well, I say this week, shortly after the Russian Grand Prix, Jack, Lewis Hamilton obviously had his penalties at the start of the Russian Grand Prix, but he had his penalty points removed after the race. Obviously, with the steward saying that basically it was Mercedes that, you know, caused the fault. Obviously, now he isn't within 2 penalty points of a race ban, you know, but how would you sort of, you know, respond to his reactions of that Grand Prix weekend?
It wasn't Lewis at his best when
No.
when the Grand Prix was actually in session. On reading that, I can understand why they didn't penalise the driver quite so much, considering that the licence points are specifically meant to focus on dangerous driving and unsportsmanlike conduct. So normally I would have thought we'd see this in like a fine placed on the team. So I can understand why, but it's another way of sort of keeping the teams in check, I suppose, because if their star driver's going to get a race ban, I mean, that's quite the shocker. So the reasoning I can understand with Hamilton's, I can't. It did seem very much as though it was a bit of like he felt he could almost be above it, arguing the case. It certainly pales in comparison to when Daniel got his penalty and just or drive faster. Look, when you're a 6-time world champion and about to hit your 7th, I can understand why. You're going to get frustrated. Every hiccup like that's going to really just get to you. But you'd have thought he might have carried himself a bit of cooler head. But I mean, heat of the moment and all that, maybe a little bit of it can be forgiven, but I certainly wouldn't go with all of it.
Yeah. And Alex, like I mentioned it at the time of the penalty being discussed, Charles Leclerc did something very similar at Spa last season and escaped the penalty. Lewis is claiming that stewards are coming for him this season, and you know he's going to spend the rest of the season driving within the letter of the law to not give them any excuse to penalise him. Like we've seen this from Lewis before, like particularly early in his career. You know, Jack's mentioned it as well. Like when you're on the verge of getting your 7-time world champion, we sort of see these things from Lewis, don't we?
Yeah, a lot of things happen in heat of the moment. Well, it's not just been Lewis, several drivers have done that before in the past who have been successful and decisions have not gone their way and they've complained about it. Human nature. But yeah, there's always questions about inconsistencies in the stewards' decisions, and with Leclerc, as you mentioned last season, I think the bottom line is from Hamilton Mercedes, they just need to move on and concentrate on the next race. They've got the 2 penalty points conceded. That's it. Draw a line underneath it, and we go on to the next race. And he is within. Well, it's not completely. He's still got a margin over Bottas. Bottas closed it a little bit, but Hamilton's still a title favourite. So I think they'll be quickly forgotten about if they have a successful weekend next weekend.
And Owain, just one last point on the thing. Obviously, Lewis won't lose any more points until the 17th of November, which is a couple of days after the Turkish Grand Prix. It's very unlikely that we'll see, you know, the championship leader with a race ban, isn't it?
It's unlikely. And to be honest, as much as, yeah, obviously it would be a massive setback for Mercedes to have Lewis Hamilton lose the chance to potentially win another 25 points. Part of me looks at it with the sort of pragmatism of the amount of points difference they've got, over his nearest rival is just enough that he could take that hit. Obviously they wouldn't like it, but you can't ignore that fact. You know, he's so far ahead. He's I believe it. Yes, 44 points ahead of Valtteri Bottas. That's a race win and a 3rd place for Bottas that he'd have to win just to get anywhere near. So I kind of, it'd be the sort of thing. Like obviously, I can see why they've got argued that it's Mercedes' fault, but he completely could have eaten that, and it wouldn't have harmed his title chances that much, to be honest.
Yeah, like it's funny you mentioned that Lewis is 44 points ahead of Bottas. Bottas is also 33 points ahead of Verstappen. So some weird number things going on in this season's Grand Prix. But let's move on to this weekend's Nürburgring Grand Prix. The Eifel Grand Prix at the Nürburgring circuit. I should mention. There's too many names for this circuit, but this circuit is one with a lot of history. Obviously, with the Nordschleife, and it's a circuit that we've seen drivers have very unfortunate accidents at, particularly with the Nordschleife version of it. And we obviously had the 24-hour race at the Nordschleife Nürburgring Hybrid last weekend. But Jack, Lewis Hamilton, we've mentioned he's miles ahead. Are we expecting a good weekend from him this weekend?
Simple as, really. Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
It's November, it's Germany, so it will probably rain and be just generally awful weather. So Lewis is a beast in the wet. That Mercedes is a beast in general. So yeah, I think it's fairly clear cut. He's a clear favourite for this race. His only real, as far as I'm aware, his only real challenge is going to be if Bottas can keep some momentum going. But yeah, Hamilton's going to be pretty confident going into this one. As Alex mentioned, like they would have drawn a line under Russia. That shouldn't be weighing on his mind anymore. He's a professional at the end of the day. So yeah, it's going to be pretty strong, I would imagine, especially Mercedes. The home race, they will not have a repeat of last year.
And Alex, Valtteri Bottas' teammate, obviously won last weekend. You know, he'll be wanting to keep that momentum going, won't he?
He will, but without wishing to sound too much of a downer on him, I don't think he will, because let's be realistic, it wasn't really a straight fight, in spite of the comments that Bottas made on the radio, which is famous for. No, I think it's Lewis Hamilton will be in perfect position to fight back and regain ground that he lost in Russia.
So a driver we've talked a bit about today, Owain, Max Verstappen. You know, we're used to seeing him pretty much third on the podium. I don't think he's ever raced at the Nürburgring before. He's a bit young for that. So, you know, unknown territory this weekend.
Yeah, obviously he's never raced it before, but to be honest, with a talent like Max Verstappen, the best drivers always manage to find a way to be, good wherever they go. That's just sort of part and parcel of being the talents that they are. So I don't expect him to do poorly. The only limiting factor really being the Red Bull. To be honest, that's what I think will may harm him. But to be honest, the Nürburgring kind of suits that car. It's fairly high up in the mountains. So and as far as I'm aware, Honda still has a sort of better efficiency on the hybrid system, which sort of makes up for the losses in the internal combustion engine. And also, with the car being sort of designed around him, and Red Bull obviously has the data for the setup. I don't see massive issues arising, to be honest. I think it's going to be a bit more of the status quo.
Yeah, we're probably going to see, a Hamburg there podium if things just don't really have a bit of a shock. But, we've seen this season that like unknown races and the repeats and stuff like that, well, the repeated circuits at least, we get unusual results, if not, something special. So Max Verstappen is the driver who can bring something special to this weekend. Jack, surprisingly still in fourth in the championship, Lando Norris from McLaren. Like, I wouldn't have expected that.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is bloody brilliant. I don't know if he'll continue it. I'm a bit unsure about how the McLaren's going to fare, really, mainly because Renault has just spooked me with their pace. So it's not necessarily a high downforce track, so it might swing a bit more in their favour. But I'm not too sure. I mean, another one that probably, I don't know if he's raced in at the Nürburgring, unless he's been in German F3 or something, but I can't quite remember. So, but yeah, I mean, again, it's not a case of that should shock him or anything like that. So him and Carlos will just do what they normally do, get a bullet off the line and see what they can do from there.
Yeah, and Alex, Jack just mentioned Carlos. Obviously, he's had 2 DNFs in the last 2 races. He'll obviously be wanting to, make amends for those. Like, obviously, they weren't really. I wouldn't put the blame on Carlos for those 2 incidents, but he's not really pulled in any points over the last 2 weekends, and will be wanting to make amends for that.
Yeah, since that incredible second place finish in Monza, nothing's really gone right for him since. So they really wanted to get some more points on the board and catch up to his teammate. But I think at the Nürburgring, it's a golden opportunity for a lot of drivers, because we've seen when that circuit was on the calendar before, it did occasionally produce pretty wild races, especially when the weather's concerned, which we touched on earlier with the 24-hour race. If something like that happens, then it's anybody's game. And we saw in Monza where the tables were turned a little bit, and Carlos Sainz found himself right up at the top. So it's not impossible to think that something like that could happen again. But yeah, I think his prime priority will be trying to get back up to terms with Lando in the championship.
Just bring it home, Carlos. Just bring it home. But yeah, the next in the championship, Racing Point, Owain. We saw in Austria in the rain that they clearly didn't copy Mercedes' wet setup, even if they did appear to copy Mercedes this season. If it does rain this weekend, they'll be taking notes, won't they?
You'd hope so. They've been sort of off the pace. I don't think they're maximising the potential of the car, and I'm surprised to see them like as far down as they are. I thought they should be, beating out. They should clearly be. Well, they should have been the third best team at the start of the year. That's what I've predicted. We just haven't seen it really. They've just not, for various reasons, not capitalised on the performance of the car. And you'd hope that they'd sort of have been able to get on top of the setup and things like that by now. But we've only seen it rain once. So I'm not sure how much of an understanding they're going to have. And if it does, if it does rain, I can't really predict where they're going to end up.
It would be quite ironic to see Racing Point just fall further back behind to become, Aston Martin, and still having Sebastian Vettel not quite as far up as he'd be hoping to with that, driver move next season. But a team that, are often very Marmite, Jack, Renault. Go on.
Sorry, I mean, it's just one of those things. Like I've not been able to place them really. But I thought that it was all at first. It seemed like they might be a low drag car, but then we've gone to high downforce circuits and they've done well there. I mean, it's good to see a general improvement. I reckon they're going to be feeling pretty strong. I mean, Russia was pretty good for them, so if maybe a bit lacking in pace for Ocon. So yeah, it's going to be a bit unusual. They're going to try and take every point they can get, and McLaren's going to be their big focus. Try and get both their cars immediately behind Verstappen, I think, is their best target. Yeah, I reckon their car's going to go pretty well here. I mean, every other prediction I've made of them has been wrong, so I may as well just completely turn my ideas on them. So yeah, I think they'll probably do all right.
Yeah, and as like you mentioned as well, Daniel Ricciardo has basically been on the doorstep of the podium for the last couple of races, and maybe it's because we want it to happen so much. It's like Hulkenberg, just the more we want it, the less it's going to happen. And we need to stop so that David Croft, yeah, it is David Croft, isn't it? Basically, just so that Crofty stops going on about tattoo shops near whatever race circuit we're at. But Alex, Jack touched on this. Like in Russia, Ocon couldn't pass a Ferrari, particularly Vettel's Ferrari, for several laps. That shouldn't really be happening with this year's car, should it?
You'd think not in terms of straight line speed, because the Ferrari's been woeful. It's probably a mixture of the way the tyres are performing, and probably driver confidence as well. Obviously, we know how Ricciardo's inclined to pull daring overtaking manoeuvres. Maybe Ocon doesn't have that ability to the level that his teammate does. But it's difficult to really judge on how. I think Ocon we're kind of expecting quite a bit from him when the announcement was made that he was going to be a full-time Renault driver, and he's not really hit the heights that I really thought he was going to do. And it kind of showed last week when when the order came through that he had to let Ricciardo pass. And I mentioned this on the podcast last weekend. That's the one thing you do not want to hear when you're a driver. Let your teammate through and let him have a go. And I think that really affected him. And it's gonna put real fire into his performance this weekend, I think, or next weekend, I should say.
And particularly as well, if he does get asked to do it again, maybe do it a little bit further down, a little bit less far down the straight, so that Ricciardo doesn't then get a 5-second penalty. But yeah, Owain, let's talk about everyone's most prestigious midfield team, Ferrari. It's going to be a weird one where they're going to fit this weekend, because we keep mentioning that Ferrari are nowhere, and then every now and then Charles Leclerc manages to finish halfway up the top 10. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean he's higher up than Pierre Gasly, and Pierre Gasly's won a race. So yeah, it's one of those things of like, we keep having to go at like you say, we keep having to go at Ferrari, and then you just getting to Q3 and getting fourth, third, second place finishes out of that Ferrari is Charles Leclerc. Not so much Sebastian Vettel. He's more where you'd expect down the table in 13th, but it's so strange that that obviously we predict that it's going to be bad, and they weren't all that terrible in Mugello and also in Russia. Obviously not where Ferrari should be, but not sort of it wasn't the bloodbath that we expected afterwards. So I don't really know where they're going to end up. I have to wait and see really on it. I think that, to be honest, actually thinking about the finishes that Charles has got, I think that speaks to the ability that he has. Good drivers always outperform their cars. It just speaks to how good he is that he's doing, he's in 7th on 57 points where he probably shouldn't be.
It clearly shows as well, like, why Ferrari have got the faith in him to give him that, multi-year contract that they gave him last season. He is Ferrari's future, and currently he's showing why, putting in some very good performances in a car that is not very good. Jack, AlphaTauri Honda currently, they're a race winning team now with their new name, but we never really know where they're going to be. They're a bit like Ferrari, but more consistent.
Yeah, I suppose you're right there. It's one I've not really thought about. Like, they could either be in like top 6 or they could be down in like 14th. So yeah, I mean, Gasly seems to be putting in the strong performances more regularly. So we'd expect him higher up, obviously. Otherwise, I'm not really, like I say, I'm not too sure. You can't even gauge on wet setup because the one wet race we had wound up being dry in the end. So I reckon Gasly's going to at least get top 10, given his past performances. And he is in that very close midfield group from, is it Norris down to, is it Leclerc? I can't remember. Yeah, I reckon Gasly's going to be their best hope for points. Whether or not Kvyat would get out of get into the top 10 shootout, is another. I don't think he will personally, but he'll have to fight for points. I mean, to be honest, I don't think he's going to be there for much longer anyway. So, yeah, we'll wait and see what they're pushing from him.
Kvyat did, end up being the lead of the Red Bulls last weekend. Not Red Bulls, the lead of the AlphaTauris last weekend. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Alex, Alfa Romeo, other than Leclerc, usually the leading Ferrari team of a weekend. Kimi's done well here previously. Giovinazzi has done well at some tracks every now and then, but AlphaTauri, not Alpha. What am I on about? Alfa Romeo. There's too many Alphas. Alfa Romeo. Yeah, this weekend. I'm not quite sure where they'll be, other than near the back.
Yeah, it's well, if history is going to repeat itself, the Nürburgring's usually a bit of a bogey circuit for Kimi Räikkönen. He's had some terrible luck there when it was on the calendar before. I'll never forget the 2005 race where it was the final lap and the suspension gave way, and he's had a few other mechanical failures there as well. I don't think he's ever won there. Actually, no, he hasn't. He came close in the last race at the Nürburgring. But that's irrelevant to next weekend's Grand Prix. Yeah, it's highly likely that Alfa Romeo are going to be towards the rear of the grid, and there have been a couple of races where they'll be on the back row. That's something that they're not going to want to be repeating. Like, as I've said on previous episodes, it's one of these situations where their best hope is that if something crazy happens towards the front and there's a lot of retirements, and therefore they can pick up the scraps left behind, because on pure pace they're not really capable of finishing in the top 10. I reckon if it's a race where nothing major happens and I hate to use the phrase that Owain used as well, at status quo, I'll nick that off him, then it's going to be positions 12 and 13, I reckon, at best for Alfa Romeo.
Like the few occasions where they have popped up in the top 10, as you mentioned, have been where there's been some sort of carnage at the front, and it's very rare that they end up there on pure pace alone.
Like I said, I mean, Giovinazzi got some points in Austria, race 1, but there was a lot of retirement to that race, and Kimi got a point finish in Mugello where there was a lot of accidents. So, barring a miracle, I can't really see them getting into the top 10.
Owain has, definitely not the leading Ferrari, usually the furthest back Ferrari. They've finally got a point, which is good. I believe they got that in Mugello anyway. But, it's going to be another long weekend. I mean, it's going to be a long weekend for all the Ferrari engined cars, but a long weekend for Haas in particular.
Yeah, they don't tend to, they just don't tend to run particularly well anywhere, to be honest. And they tend to not make their lives easier for themselves. But, I mean, Kevin Magnussen's doing okay. He's got a point, which is good for him. Romain Grosjean, I don't know how the order works on the standings, but he's, according to the one I've got here, he's last. So I assume that's on countback or something like that. But that's not going to go well. At least if it's a kind of crazy race with a bit of weather, that might neutralise the sort of speed advantage down the straights that other teams are going to have. Might help them out. That's how we've seen other teams score in the past. Is using a wet race to turn sort of a pretty standard one stop into something a bit mental. That's the only real way I see them getting points anymore.
They're not really, a good contender to even be finishing, in the 9th and 10th places. If you're expecting Haas to be in the points, that's a bold prediction, and that's not one I'm making this weekend.
need 8 cars to retire. That's what you need.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jack, let's just finally touch on Williams. George Russell has a chance of getting into Q2. He's always got a good chance of getting into Q2. Nicholas Latifi, his qualifying performances haven't been as strong as his teammates, that's for sure, because, well, no one's qualifying performances are ever really as strong as George Russell's in retrospect. But this weekend, as much as we keep saying it, Williams, they're very unlikely to get a points finish, aren't they?
Yeah, unfortunately so. I suspect George will do his usual qualifying masterpiece, but it's a circuit where the aero is going to be quite important, and the efficiency in the aero package isn't really there, especially in the mid sector where the speed picks up. So yeah, they're going to struggle. It'll be another race. I think they'll probably be hoping for a bit of weather, and if the track can trap some clouds in place, there might be an opportunity for him, but it'd be hard to argue with what's been going on so far, both in terms of Williams' performances and the weather's performance. It seems to have a barrier around a force field around the circuits in the past. So yeah, it's what can we say really? It's going to be a struggle. I do desperately hope they get their point at some point, but I can't see it happening, unfortunately.
Then maybe we'll just have to wait for 2022 to get some points on the board, if not, anytime sooner. So that brings us on to our, expected podiums. Alex, who's going to be on your podium for this weekend?
Probably Mercedes 1-2, Hamilton ahead of Bottas, first and second, and position 3, trying desperately not to stay Verstappen because it's kind of a bit repetitive. But I'm going to make a bold prediction in the same one as my podium prediction. I'm going to say Renault will finally get a podium and Daniel Ricciardo. I'm probably totally wrong, but I'm doing it just so as not as if to go for the typical top 3.
Fair enough. Owain, your podium, please.
Oh goodness, got the same dilemma as Alex. Don't really want to say Hambot there. Let's go with Lando for third. Probably Lewis Hamilton's going to get the win. Be an appropriate praise to be appropriate praise to draw level with Michael. That's what I'm thinking with that. And Verstappen for second.
You're expecting another Bottas missed podium.
Yeah.
Jack, your podium, please.
Have your way. Right, yeah, Hamilton's going to win. I can't see that happening any other way. I'll go for Verstappen for second. And Sainz third. I reckon Rain's going to play some havoc.
I think following the same logic, I'm obviously putting Hamilton first because he's very much the master of the rain on the grid that we've currently got. Verstappen second. I think we're all, other than Alex, are expecting Bottas to have some sort of incident this weekend. And by incident, I just mean not finish on the podium. But in third, I think I'll go Lando. Yeah, McLaren on the podium. Be nice to see. So we've already had Alex's bold prediction with Ricciardo being on the podium. Owain?
You know what? Kimi for the win. Yeah.
Now that's bold.
It is, yeah.
Jack?
Break the curse. Break the curse.
I wonder what the odds will be on that. I might have to.
I'm not betting on it. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely not.
I don't care what they are. I'm not betting on that.
Jack?
I'm going to say we lose 8 cars.
8 cars?
8 car retirements.
You said Haas for points.
No, I mean, there's no guarantee that they won't be in said 8 cars. I mean, look at the drivers.
Now I've got no idea what to go for now. A fastest lap comes from a car outside the top 10. I think that's pretty,
Oh, so what?
bold.
Russell's tactic from Russia pays off this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Bolt on a set of supers at the end of the race.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing that and thinking, fair play to him. If you're not...
It's like, yeah, I love the conspiracy that came out of that as well. It's like Mercedes trying to take away the fastest lap point from Bottas or something.
Everything has a conspiracy behind it, apparently. But yeah, that was the F1 Grid Talk preview for the Eifel Grand Prix. We are available on Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Omni Studio, and Pocket Cast. Just search F1 Grid Talk. There's a back catalogue of shows now with previews, reactions to qualifying and the race results. We're on Reddit, the subreddit F1 Grid Talk. We have a Patreon for mics, lights, and better recording equipment. We'll be back on Saturday to review the Eifel Grand Prix qualifying. Thank you very much to my panelists.
Thank you.
No problem.
And we will see you next weekend. Goodbye.
Bye.